This is We the People's Forum, a Braver Angels event where everyday Americans get time at the podium. My name is David Lapp. As I said, I'm here in South Lebanon, Ohio, which is just north of Cincinnati. And it's also where we had the first ever Braver Angels workshop back in December 2016. So the purpose of We the People's Forum at Braver Angels is to hear from everyday Americans on the issues of the day. We hear from people of all races, classes, places, and politics, and we're especially interested in hearing from working class, everyday Americans who we often don't get to hear from on the issues of the day. And tonight's forum is brought to you by the We the People's Project leadership team at Braver Angels. Now, some of you, this is your first event at Braver Angels, and Braver Angels, our mission is to bridge the partisan divide. We bring together Americans from across the political spectrum to talk about the issues, find common ground, clarify differences, and build relationships. And we hope that this is the first of many Braver Angels conversations if you're new. So this forum tonight is on After COVID, Can We Have Accountability Without Retribution? It was inspired by conversations that grew out of the Truth and Trust initiative at Braver Angels, which is an initiative that's co-led by former NIH Director Francis Collins and one of our speakers tonight, Wilk Wilkinson, who is the host of Derate the Hate podcast. So those two have been co-leading this Truth and Trust initiative to say, what can we do to build trust moving forward among ordinary citizens and public health leaders? And as part of that initiative, Francis and Wilk engaged in a public conversation at the Braver Angels Convention in July of 2023 about what they've been doing and their differing perspectives and where they agree on moving forward. Now, a video of that conversation went viral in late December, early January. And then some of you, perhaps, who are here, saw those videos. And that was a Braver Angels event where Francis Collins and Wilk were in conversation. And one of the things that emerged from that conversation and other conversations we've been doing with the Truth and Trust Initiative is that there's among people who are generally critical or not supportive of how public health leaders generally handled COVID, there are differing perspectives there on what should be done moving forward. Does a depolarizing approach to the issue work or not necessarily? What should accountability look like? And is it possible to have accountability without retribution? So in tonight's discussion, on the first part of the discussion, we're going to hear differing perspectives from people who have generally been critical of how COVID was handled. And then in the second part, we're going to widen the conversation, and anyone in the audience will be able to weigh in. Now, at Braver Angels, generally speaking, usually, we'll dive into an issue and there's a red-blue split on the issue, and we'd like to hear from people across the political spectrum. But sometimes we'll zero in on highlight differing perspectives among one group of an issue so that we can better understand. And so that's where we're starting with tonight. And then the second part, we'll throw it open and hear from anyone who wants to weigh in. The other thing I'll say is that, and we'll hear more about this later, is that if you are interested in, we now have an initiative, Braver Angels workshops, that brings together Americans who are generally supportive of how public health leaders handled COVID and Americans who are generally not supportive or critical. And if you are interested in participating or organizing in one of those workshops, we're going to tell you how you can participate in that process later on here. So I hope I hope some of you are inspired to take that next step. Okay, so now I do want to share with you that what we call the Braver Angels Way, our conversation tonight will seek to be guided by the Braver Angels Way, and in all of our Braver Angels activities. This is kind of the spirit in which we operate, and I'm just going to share that here with you. So this says we state our views freely and fully without fear. We treat people who disagree with us with honesty, dignity, and respect. We welcome opportunities to engage those with whom we disagree. We believe all of us have blind spots and none of us are not worth talking to. We seek to disagree accurately, avoiding exaggeration and stereotypes. And we look for common ground where it exists and, if possible, find ways to work together. We believe that in disagreements, both sides share and learn. And in Braver Angels, neither side is teaching the other or giving feedback on how to think or say things differently. So that's the spirit in which I invite all of us to participate in this conversation. So our first speakers here, we have Kevin Bass, who is a scientist with a long-standing interest in misinformation. Tracy Hollister is a nonprofit consultant and dialogue author. Travis Tripodi owns and operates his own consulting firm and specializing in quality and management consulting in the health technology field. And then Wilk Wilkinson is the host of the D-Rate They Hate podcast. So for speakers, welcome here to the conversation. You'll kick us off here tonight. And I'm going to start with you, Wilk. Wilk, start us off with your perspective on the question, after COVID, can we have accountability without retribution? And Wilk, also share with us an experience or two that that has helped to shape your perspective on this.
Well, first of all, I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. This is an incredible crowd. It looks to be getting bigger every second, and I think it's very important that we have more and more people getting involved in this all the time. So first of all, I just want to thank everybody that is choosing to take their time to get involved in this. So do I believe that we have the ability to get accountability without retribution? And I absolutely do. I mean, one of the things that I've been talking about for a couple years now, since I became involved in this project, is the fact that a pound of flesh strategy will not get the job done. And the reason that I say that is because, with this being one of the most contentious issues of our lifetimes, and right now, I mean, we still 4 years deep into this thing cannot even agree on, as a nation, we can't even agree on what was done right, what was done wrong, where all the errors were made, who made the errors. Um, we uh, we need to be able to go into this thing with eyes open, and eyes open, minds open, hearts open, for all of those that had to make these decisions, and hoping that by doing that we can bring out the best in people and get the right answers, get an agreement or some type of an agreement on what even went wrong. Because right now we're still not there. There are a lot of people throughout the spectrum, right, that have differing mindsets on what went wrong, who did the wrong, who deserves to pay, how badly they deserve to pay. And I will just say, from my perspective, this is something that everybody has to be prepared for the long game. We live in an instantaneous gratification society, and people want answers tomorrow. They want their pound of flesh tomorrow. They're still emotionally charged, and by all rights they should be. I'm still emotionally charged at the things that I've seen over the course of the past 4 years. But I also know that if we do not allow those that have been appointed to be in these powerful positions, if we don't allow them the space to do what they think is best, without being crucified if they make a mistake, which I do believe this is the government's response to the pandemic is probably the greatest mistake, certainly in American history, by our public officials. I still believe that to this day, even being involved in this project, even spending hours upon hours upon hours talking with Dr. Francis Collins, one of the, lead architects of the government's response to this pandemic. I do still believe that this has been one of the, and will go down in American history as one of the most brutal mistakes made by our public officials. With that being said, I am still of the mindset, as I have been from the beginning, that this was probably, and I mean, I'm not 100% convinced. I don't have all the evidence. I don't think anybody has all the other evidence, but I do believe that there was probably some nefariousness in there, but it was not all nefariousness. But there are people out there right now that have, by all rights, already tried and convicted many of our public health officials, and they're ready to haul out the stockades and the gallows, put them in the National Mall,
And take about 15 more seconds, Wilk.
and I just don't think that that's the right place to be. It's a multi-step process. We first have to decide what went right, what went wrong. There's going to be plenty of time for finger pointing, but people are starting with the finger pointing, and I don't think that that's the place we start. I think that's the place we go after we figure out what happened, and then we can figure out what the punishment is after that.
Tracy, same question. What is your perspective on the question, after COVID, can we have accountability without retribution? And again, encourage you to share an experience or two that has shaped your perspective on this.
Sure. Thank you. And thanks for having me tonight. Can we have accountability without retribution? No. If retribution means legal consequences, we must have legal consequences. I'm talking here about Collins and Fauci. They were paid by taxpayer dollars. They should know what the rules are of engagement in the US Constitution and what ethical behavior is. First of all, when I look at this question, I think, what went wrong? Everything went wrong. All the major public health policies related to COVID-19, from the NIH funding of the Wuhan lab, doing risky gain-of-function bioweapons research with a foreign adversary, the CCP, to censorship of misinformation, lockdowns, masks, and RNA shots. They all did more harm than good. Now, when I think about what we should do about it, sometimes I lean toward a more forgiving approach like Wilk has. Ideally, everyone would come to the table, be on the same side of the table, put all the cards out, say, this is what happened, this is what I did, these are all of the people involved, this is why I acted the way that I did. But that assumes that we have honest people. And as I'm just about to share, we don't have honesty or scientific integrity in either Collins or Fauci. And I'll share examples specifically in bioweapons research and in censorship. In bioweapons research, there is no public good that could come of gain-of-function research that started after the anthrax attack. Fauci and Collins went out publicly saying that this was a risk worth taking in 2011. During the Obama years, they stopped doing this research for a while, but Fauci just offshored it to a lab that didn't even have the proper controls. I've spoken to 3 scientific experts who say there's an overwhelming amount of evidence this was lab created. And Fauci and Collins said that that was outrageous and a conspiracy theory, and they worked hard to create an article in the Lancet, Proximal Origins Theory, that would put to rest this notion that it was lab created. That was unscientific, that was premature, that was unethical. I submit to you that the most important question we can ask for the future of humanity is, if it were not for the support and funding of Collins and Fauci for dangerous bioweapons research in the hands of a foreign adversary, would we even have SARS-CoV-2? Second, censorship. I already mentioned them kind of clamping down on what the evidence, the strong evidence for the lab leak. But also, as we know, Collins had advocated for a full takedown of the Great Barrington Declaration, which was a sensible, targeted approach. When I asked him in person about all this censorship, he said, what else are we going to do with people who intentionally misrepresent or spread misinformation? He's no judge of intent, and he's actually no judge of misinformation as well. This is why we have a First Amendment. So I submit to you that they will not be capable of looking out for public health based on their support for censorship and their funding of unethical research. So what we need to have is a full legal investigation, full discovery. So as Wilk said, we come to greater agreement about what happened, and we hold them accountable, whether it's for First Amendment violations, lying to Congress, or even treason. But we need that to prevent the future Faucis and Collins. We need that to prevent future Faucis and Collins from doing the exact same thing. Thank you.
All right, and over to you, Travis. Same question.
Thanks, David, and thank you, Tracy and Will, for sharing your perspectives. I would say, so on the topic, can we have accountability without retribution? My answer is not can we, but it's the only way we'll get accountability. I was in the audience during the conversation that went viral that prompted this whole, that prompted this event here, where I was watching Dr. Collins talk to Wilk on stage, and I was seething, I was angry. I provided a lot of criticism about all of the things that I thought were missed, how they didn't talk about gain of function research, how they didn't seem to talk about, the potential for a lab leak theory or for natural immunity, or all these different areas that I thought that the government was wrong on. It didn't seem to be enough pushback when statistics were thrown out about lives lost because of people not getting vaccinated, things like that. I was very, frustrated coming out of that. And afterwards, I took the opportunity the next day to introduce myself to Dr. Collins, and it prompted a conversation. And we've had several conversations since, and I learned a lot of things from those conversations. The most important thing that I learned is that there were lots of areas where we disagreed that he continued to disagree on. And after I pushed back a lot, and that, he seemed to hold those positions in good faith. Now, I still can criticize those opinions, and I still think that he was wrong on them, but he seemed to genuinely hold them, and he was forthright with communicating that, for example, they didn't include national immunity in the original clinical trial methodology, and they didn't communicate it appropriately to the public. So I learned that, the beginning of our conversation started with basically a statement of, he asked me if I was looking for a confession. And I said, no, I'm not looking for a confession. I'm just trying to understand. And there was a good faith assumption as we entered into the conversation. And he felt comfortable to communicate certain things to me that I don't think that I was certainly wasn't hearing from, public health officials prior to that. And, so I would juxtapose that to the congressional hearings with Dr. Fauci that we saw a couple of weeks ago. And the Congress was, hammering him with questions, asking him, what happened here? What happened here? And all he could say over 100 times was, I don't recall. And I don't think that really gets us very far. We need the people who made these decisions to participate in the solution. And I think that it's perfectly reasonable for us to put aside legal retribution in order to find truth, in order to have a better chance at identifying truth, to put aside that desire, that primal desire inside of ourselves to really hold people to justice. So I think that so that's my major argument for why I think that it's a better way of working. But I want to kind of put some questions into whether or not legal accountability is even possible. I would invite everybody to think about what's currently happening with the Trump indictments. And whether you fall on one side or the other, ask yourself, if Trump gets if he gets ruled in a court of law to be accountable for his certain actions, is that going to change your opinion on what happened or not? So I think that sometimes legal accountability or political retribution can be a very polarizing effect that brings us further and further away from the truth. And frankly, I'd be willing to give up the justice or holding particular public health officials accountable for their bad decisions during the pandemic if it meant that as an American public we could come to a more an understanding of truth that would allow us
15 more seconds, Travis.
That would allow us to get along better with our neighbors and put in place systems in the future that would prevent this from happening. And I don't think that that means that there's no accountability at all. I think that it means that people, simply, sorry, I just lost my train of thought, but trying to rush for the time. But it doesn't mean no accountability. We certainly have to have a conversation of people losing their jobs. We don't want people in certain positions of power if they have been proven to make poor decisions in times of crisis. However, if it means that we don't, if we say, hey, you're not going to go to jail for 300 years, or you're not going to be put in stocks, I'd be willing to have that conversation.
All right. And Kevin, same question for you. Oh, go ahead and unmute yourself, Kevin.
Those are some very interesting responses to the question. What I'm going to say has a lot of resonance with what Travis said, and also what Tracy and Wilk said, of course. But I think one of the core issues that we need to think about with respect to how we deal with the aftermath of the pandemic is what are we trying to achieve? What is the goal that we're trying to achieve in our response? And from my point of view, I think the goal should be to prevent this from happening again and to prevent things that are like this from happening again. Because for the pandemic, this isn't the only time something like this in some similar ways has happened. One can think there are a lot of parallels, I think, to the invasion of Iraq, for example, how we thought Saddam Hussein had WMDs. It turned out that he didn't. We thought he was supporting terrorism. It turned out that he wasn't. We thought that the war would be over. The intervention, our proposed intervention, would be very easy, would take a few weeks, and it turned out to take more than a decade. And so I think things like this have happened. That's not the only example. There's a lot of things like this that happen. And the question I ask when I think about the pandemic is, why did the pandemic happen the way that it did? Why was it so possible for, from my point of view, misinformation from the public health officials to become so systematic and essentially override decades of public health scientific consensus, because a hysteria took over basically the professional managerial class, the ruling class, that then sort of, I think, pressured the public health officials to sort of fall in line and pretend that they were leading, but they're actually following along with the hysteria themselves. There was a total hysteria that took over the ruling class of our society, I think. And then the question is how do we prevent something like that from happening again? One of the things that I think is very important for what made this hysteria possible is the fact that there was a very narrow vision and narrow understanding of what appropriate sets of values and preferences should govern the pandemic response. I think this narrow understanding was very important for perpetuating the hysteria. If you're focusing so much on one particular metric, a metric that is close to everybody's hearts, that makes everybody emotional, which is saving lives, right? If that is your overwhelming focus, if that's the only thing you're focusing on, not only is that very narrow, but that can also be a very emotional sort of thing. So I think the ideology that was very prominent at the time, which was in some, I mean, everybody cares about saving lives, but I think sort of the group of people who tend to run public health have that orientation over all others to a much greater degree than a lot of other parts of society does. And I think public health wasn't listening to those people. So to go back to the conversation that Wilk had with Francis Collins, I remember just very distinctly that clip where he said, you know, we were thinking about New York, how to deal with New York, how to deal with the lives with New York, but what would happen? I don't know if he said Minnesota or whatever it was. What would we weren't thinking about what would happen over there. That's because that input, they weren't taking that input. They weren't even thinking about that. That wasn't a part of the equation because they weren't socially connected and hearing that input. They were in their own echo chambers talking amongst themselves with their own understanding of things. And so my deep concern is what's driving this sort of like very narrow response that excludes a whole huge segment of society and also is very, in some ways, extremist, is the fact that I think a lot of us are living in echo chambers. I think that's driving a lot of the polarization. I think we don't have civic organizations that we used to that would bring people together, that would allow people to talk and share their views and sort of calibrate a shared reality between people. Of course, we've gone from, you know, just a few television stations to like everybody has their own customized media environment.
And so, take about 15 more seconds, Kevin.
Yeah. So as a result of that, I think we've ended up in this polarized place where we're not understanding each other because we're not connecting with each other on a regular basis. And so what I know this is very pie in the sky and idealistic, but I think this is the root of the problem. We need some way to rebuild our culture, rebuild our society along the lines that will allow us to connect with each other better so that we can have that shared understanding, because without that shared understanding, we're not even going to have a shared understanding of what happened during the pandemic in the first place. We're not even going to be able to have accountability in that sense. And then if we just like, you know, we put Fauci in jail, you know, I mean, I think some of us would that would please us on some level, but at the same time, that would be totally, that it doesn't, I don't think that it necessarily addresses the underlying problem.
Okay. I want to go back to Wilk here. Wilk, in your conversation with Francis Collins in December 2022, and then again at the convention, you both talked about the idea of a truth and reconciliation process addressing COVID. Could you say a little bit about how you Wilk think about that, and how you could see that playing out, and what you think the value of that kind of process would be?
Right. So I think, you know, kind of to Travis's point and then to Kevin's point as well, the idea of just you know, and the same thing that I've talked about so many times, that pound of flesh strategy is not going to get it done because people are in their echo chambers. I think the echo chamber is the root of the problem. So the idea of a truth and reconciliation project, like I said, it's a multi-step thing. The only way we get to the answers that we need on this thing is to bring all the people together, bring those, you know, as Tracy talked about, those that have been censored, those that have had their opposing ideas squashed, those who have had their reputations ruined. You know, Travis talked about people who have lost their jobs, lost their businesses. I've talked several times publicly and in the groups that we've spoke with about how people's life savings, everything that they've ever had, was invested into their small business, and their small business was crushed at the hands of big government, shutting them down under false pretense. Those things we do need accountability for. But in order to get accountability for it, we have to get all the right parties to the table. We have to open up that dialogue between all parties and make sure that everybody is at least on somewhat the same page. And then we can start to figure out, okay, we now know what went wrong. We can at least agree on most of these things.
And we'll follow-up question for you. Would that truth and reconciliation process, that would presumably involve people who think that, you know, that people like you, Will, that your perspective on COVID is wrong, and that there was misinformation shared that should, you know, and people were too polarizing. I don't know. It would presumably include public health leaders and ordinary people who think that mistakes were made on the opposite side.
Oh, absolutely. I think all perspectives need to be hashed out. Some are going to be easily squashed and pushed, pushed off the table quickly. I mean, the reason that many of the false narratives ever gained legs, this is something that I've spoke with Francis Collins, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, many other health officials. The reason that many of these wild narratives ever gained legs in the first place was because of the suppression of differing opinions, differing mindsets. It suppressing differing mindsets gives fuel to the fire of misinformation. It does. And without that, we probably never would have had a lot of the more wild and crazy narratives. So everybody comes to the table, all the mindsets come, and then those that are, have no merit will prove themselves to have no merit in a pretty quick fashion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Then we whittle it down until we find what actually happened. Where did we go wrong? Where did we go right? We need, I was just having a conversation with Dr. Jay Bhattacharya earlier, just like after the Challenger disaster, back in the 80s. There was a scientific problem. They brought together a panel of people. They diagnosed what actually went wrong and then figured out how to make sure that did not happen again.
Okay.
It wasn't about hanging the person out to dry right off the bat that may have been responsible for the, crack in the fuel cell, whatever it was, but the reality is this. If we don't at least have the conversation, if we don't open up that dialogue, as Travis said, as Kevin said, if we instantly go for bringing the gallows out and ready to hang these people up, the conversation isn't even going to get started.
I want to go back
I think that's the reason that the conversation hasn't been started yet.
Okay. I want to go back to you, Tracy. I wonder, what would you say is the value, if any, of depolarization to the question of how we move forward after COVID?
Well, I too believe in dialogue, but when people come to the table for dialogue, they have to speak honestly without an agenda, without a PR agency behind them. Fauci and Collins deserved massive public distrust because they earned it, because they lied, they covered up, and they supported the suppression of other voices. So I in theory and ideally, I want them at the table. I don't want them like locked into jail where they can't speak. I want them to speak, but I want to create incentives for them to be honest. And as of yet, there's limited hangouts, some small admissions, but it's not in their interest to admit that had they not funded and supported gain of function research, we wouldn't have had SARS-CoV-2 and we wouldn't have had all this division. They helped create the division. They abused their power. And I mean, literally, they're responsible for the deaths of millions of people. So I'm having a little bit of trouble. If somebody is a murderer, I mean, and this is not hyperbole for me to say this. If somebody's a murderer, do you invite them to the table and talk about, all of the motivations and things that they had and, expect them to be honest?
So it comes down to the perceived integrity of the people who are at the table.
Yeah, they need to be honest. And so when Collins gave a speech that the Tucson Alliance invited him to, spent a great deal of time talking about his career and his history, and he didn't support having another person like Jay Bhattacharya. Some of us in this panel had to fight for Jay Bhattacharya to speak after Francis Collins. I don't think he's into fairness. And having met him, I can see myself, he's like members of my family. I can see, playing games after ice cream after dinner. I mean, he seems like a nice guy, but there's something called the banality of evil that we learned in the Nazi era. They don't have to be seem vicious. They are human beings, but we need to understand what are all of the systems in place that allow a public health official to create the biggest public health problem we've ever had in the history of the world and then get away with it.
Got it. Travis, I think I saw you wanting to weigh in there.
Yeah, I wanted to weigh in on the Truth and Reconciliation project, or the potential for something like that, but also just what Tracy said is really interesting. And I just want to, I guess, point to, because I couldn't agree more, that it's important, like we need to figure out what went wrong systemically, and we need to fix that problem. My argument, I guess, is that we really do need Dr. Collins and Dr. Fauci to help participate in that problem-solving process. We need the knowledge of how and why they made decisions that they made, because it's so unclear. Like, what was it? Fear? Was there logic behind it? How can we prevent this? Like, what was it? Something else? Like, I don't know. We need to. It would be very, very helpful for us to be able to have the information that they have in their heads and exists nowhere else as part of the problem solving process. I would also say that, like, when it comes to, and I'm, depending on the day, I can be sympathetic to the idea of classifying these people as murderers. And I would just say that the intention, like in our legal system, even with murder, so if you're going to go in that approach, the intention behind the person's actions and their likelihood of repeating it is a consideration for how we evaluate the repercussions for those people. And so I think it's worthwhile to draw a distinction between, is it were these evil intentions, or were these accidents, or were these consequences of really poor incentives that are like go far outside the responsibility of the people that we're talking about. And I think that it's just, it's worthwhile for both of those things, right? To approach the conversation to say, let's assume that it was good faith and not bad faith actions. Let's assume it was lack of competence, and, engage the conversation with that. And even, I think that Dr. Collins and Dr. Fauci clam up often because they're looking across the aisle and the people are calling them evil or vicious or murderers and things like that. And I think they're a lot less likely to participate in the conversation when that's what they're seeing. And a lot less likely to share the truth that potentially, they made a really bad mistake because they were afraid. I think that's very difficult for somebody to say if that's the case. And they need to be encouraged in lots of different ways, encouraged to be able to share that information if, by, again, an assumption of good faith on the other side, but also potentially, again, removing the legal consequences from the equation so that we can get that information, because I do think it's so necessary to have it.
Kevin, you talked about the information silos that we're in, and as you see it, that contributing to how the pandemic played out. And then you talked about, can we build a culture in which we're not in these silos, a culture in which we're engaging with each other and so forth and so on. How do you think, maybe get concrete here, what do you see the solution looking like there, and kind of, so how do you see that culture being built? What are the steps towards it? Oh, you're muted, Kevin.
Obviously, that's like a massive, super important question, super difficult question.
Well, I just note, Kevin, too, that you're somebody who, if you will, has moved from one group to another, and feel free to, maybe you're finding yourself in different information silos, because the person you are today is not the same person you were a couple of years ago. So feel free to share that as well. Well,
it's even worse than that. I still get trapped in between these information silos, and so when I first started during the pandemic, over the course of 2020, 2021, I was a total totally in favor of the public health establishment. I'd been fighting misinformation for years before 2020. And so I was really excited whenever the public health establishment got really interested in health misinformation. It was like, wow, they're interested in the same things that I'm interested in. I'm interested in these things because generally medicine and public health get most things right. Sometimes they get things wrong and then they self-correct. So even though sometimes we might be wrong about some things, in general, you should support the authorities and then sort of help people to understand why scientific consensus is the way that it is. And so going into 2020, 2021, that was my attitude. I thought COVID was going along the same lines. It was like, it was mostly right, but then maybe there were some problems, so we'll work it out. Near the end of 2022, or throughout the course of 2022, but especially near the end, I started to realize like my worldview changed for a number of different reasons, but I switched my perspective on COVID and I started seeing things from the other point of view. And the reason why that was the case is in my own battle against misinformation, I started to see some of the people who are supporting some things that the scientific establishment was saying they were completely wrong, but they were sure that they were right. And then this helped me to start understanding more about COVID. And then so whenever I switched over to the other side, from a more critical point of view, I lost like 95% of my friends, like 95, like all of them. Like, and these are people I've been talking to for 5+ years every single day. And I like none of them, I only there was like one person who I still talk to from that life. I would, you know, and it was just because like yeah, it was a tough situation, but basically, and then I had a whole new circle of people who I and then I switched from thinking on the COVIDian side, which is, you know, the pro public health side, switched from thinking, oh, all those other guys are like dumb, they don't know what they're talking about, they don't know how to read science, and I switched to the other side, and I'm like, oh, all those people are dumb, they don't know what they're talking about, they don't know how to read science, and so there's this.
How do we get to the place where those two groups are talking more with each other, and I guess building a culture in which we're sharing information? Having a better understanding of the truth.
Yeah, one of the things that Wilk said, which is very interesting, and it was sort of the flip side of what I said, was he talked about censorship. I think a big reason this whole censorship industrial complex, so to speak, is in place, or at least the government and media and the universities have been trying to do it, especially during COVID-19. Honestly, I think it's because they're so sure that they're right and that the other side is crazy that they don't see any problem with it at all. Like
so intellectual humility by everyone.
They don't have any doubt that they're right and the other side is wrong. So it's of course justified. It has to be. It's of course, like what else could you do than to censor false information? And so I think even deeper than the problem of censorship, the problem of censorship does have to be addressed at that level for sure. We need to provide protections to prevent that from happening again. But on a deeper level, people are still feeling and thinking that way. So as a result of my own COVID advocacy, after I switched my positions, ultimately it culminated in me being kicked out of medical school. And it's because people are still just as polarized today about COVID as they were in 2020 or almost, right? Like it's, and so fixing that problem, it's more
take about 30 more seconds, Kevin.
Yeah, it's more fundamental than censorship. Censorship has to be something we focus on. We have to protect against censorship. We have to rebuild. And so how would I do that? So to try to, I've been talking about all these other things to avoid trying to answer that question because it's such a
it gets really hard. So 10 seconds, how do we do it?
You know, the historians and the sociologists, they say that we've lost our civic institutions. We have to have institutions that bring people from different backgrounds together on a regular basis, or else they're not going to understand what each other is talking about. And we don't have that. We have people who just are in their echo chamber, enjoying their echo chambers and not engage. So we have to somehow rebuild that. But saying such a thing is so pie in the sky. It's such a ridiculous thing.
I mean, that's why we're here right here. That's why we're here. I do want to open it up now to the audience. And what we're going to do here is we're going to hear from a politically diverse group. I know that this COVID issue doesn't necessarily map onto red, blue, or don't lean the other way, but just because it's the Brave Angels conversation, we're here. We hear from people across the political spectrum. There's two things. You can either ask a question of one of the speakers, and if you ask a question, just keep it to a minute. And please do ask a question in which it's not a gotcha question in which you're trying to make a point, but it's actually a question of curiosity, something that you're curious about. Or instead of asking a question, you can weigh in with your own perspective to the question. After COVID, can we have accountability without retribution? Take up to 3 minutes for a comment, and encourage you to share an experience or two that has shaped your perspective on this question. I would ask that for those of you who are raising your hands, if you could just rename yourself to indicate where you are. Either you lean red, lean blue, or other, or don't lean either way, other or independent, so that I can make sure to call on a politically diverse group. Okay, so a question for one of the speakers, and if you do that, take a minute, or a comment weighing in on the question, and take up to 3 minutes for that. I'm going to start with you, Kyle. Kyle, just tell us where you're on the political spectrum so we can keep track here. And do you have a question or a comment?
A bit of both. I will say where I lean is I've kind of switched more to the libertarian side. I just call myself a former conservative, but I've just seen more problems in the party I used to vote for. I mean, the way I see it is like, look, the other party, they have their views. I can't change that, but my own party seemed to be just full of people who wanted to get things done and people who just wanted to keep things the same. So that's why I switched.
Got it. So generally libertarian. Got it. Go for it.
My question is for Travis. My question to you is this. Do you believe that there can be a difference between retribution and justice? And the thing is, when I look at all that happened during COVID, it's hard for me to overlook and effectively just drop like the greatest attack on civil liberties I've seen in my entire life. Things that were so normal and were just forgotten as if they never existed in the first place. I saw courts too cowardly to uphold people's rights. I saw people getting away with the worst things. I saw police, the people I
go ahead
trusted.
and rephrase the question again.
Do you believe that retribution and do you believe that that you can get justice without it being retribution? Because I see the whole phrase, this whole thing, can we have accountability without retribution? I think the question is, can we have accountability without justice? And
so let's get Travis's weigh in on that question. Go ahead, Travis. Take up 2 to 3 minutes, Travis, on that.
Thanks for the question, Kyle. I think it's a really interesting one, and I too lean libertarian, right? So I'm very sympathetic to your anger, and I view the situation very similarly. I think that I do believe that you can have accountability without justice, and I guess it depends on where you draw the boundaries around justice. And what I really am interested in is, from a problem-solving perspective, the individuals that were responsible for making the decisions. I know that people really don't want to hear the term amnesty, and I certainly am not advocating for amnesty, but it is so important that we know why they made those decisions, that I'm willing to say, like, let's put away justice for those individuals, right? And then put in place, protections to prevent it from ever happening again. And I think that it can also, it doesn't mean like no justice, right? So if you identify that somebody was a bad actor, like a truly bad actor, and broke the law, I wouldn't say take that off the table, but I do think that like there needs to be like some grace for the people that, from a libertarian perspective, had way too much authority to begin with, right? And like how they were, and how they used that authority and wielded that power, right? It is what it is. It happened. I'd like to see it reduced. And for those individuals, I just would prioritize the information and arriving at a shared understanding of truth. I don't know if that answers your question.
Great. Thank you for the question, Kyle. Let me go to Jerry. Jerry, looks like you lean Purple, and do you have a question or a comment?
Comment. I think it's going to be a comment, and it may be a question at the end. But I got to say that I'm here because I was aghast at that Collins talk with Wilk. Wilk, I felt like it was so unfair to you to have to be there in public against a guy who could say, "Well, I have the pedigree, I have the education, I have the da da da." You know, you're right. Bhattacharya would have been a much better opponent. And yet I felt so. I wrote to Brave Angels telling them that. And David, thank you so much for bringing this conversation here today. The elephant in the room for me is Big Pharma. It has not been mentioned yet. And we take a look to say why? Well, why? Maybe because the pharmaceutical agencies control so much of what goes on in our agency. The pharmaceutical companies own the agencies, and there is no public evaluation of what is going on within these corporations, and the money that's given to them is so large. So yes, I am purple, but I'd say I'm really a Kennedy independent, and I hope to be, Travis, a Kennedy libertarian as we move forward. I hope by the end of the month, that's what's going to happen. So we really get down to what the real problem is not this one. This is a symptom we're looking at, and it is a problem of our entire medical system. We look at symptoms and we treat we treat these diseases instead of preventing them. The real problem is that we have a healthcare system that doesn't work, that relies on pharmaceuticals more and more instead of really learning how the natural body creates an immune system. And there's so many people that didn't need any of these protocols, that their natural immunity worked. And thank you, Travis, for bringing that up with Collins, because when I got COVID and I had natural immunity after 2 days, and I was not afraid to be with anybody that had it, people thought I was crazy, that I was out of my mind. And this social media where I'm shadow banned all the time. I mention anything like I'm speaking here, they won't let that out there. You know, it's misinformation, it's disinformation, it's malinformation, because it goes against the political narrative that is paid for by the pharmaceutical companies. That's the problem. We got to get big pharma out of institutions that monitor them and regulate them. To me, that's the answer. Does anybody on the panel have any comments? Thank you so much for listening to me.
Let's leave it there as a comment. Tracy, I see you agreeing and nodding. Because it was a comment, I do want to keep on going and get other people into the conversation. But I think you got some agreement there in the panel. Let me go to Stephen Hirsch. Stephen, go for it. Do you have a question or a comment?
I have a comment, I guess. So one, we have to start with the realization that the United States handled the pandemic uniquely badly, and that we had the highest death rate among all developed countries in the world. It doesn't matter as much. There have been pandemics before, there will be pandemics again. And what matters is how we respond, no matter what the origin of the disease or the virus is. And we did not handle it well. So that should be primary among, in any response to the pandemic. And second, this panel would be enormously better if it had somebody who actually worked, in a public health manner during the pandemic. It would have been much more valuable to have that vision presented. That's my comment.
All right, thank you, Stephen. I want to go back to Barbie. Barbie, do you have a question or a comment?
I think I have both, but I'd like to start with the question, and I'll address it to you, David. Does this all mean COVID is over? Is this something to celebrate? No more vaccines, no more shots, no more people dying to get their shots. My friends can't wait to get their shots. And I'm like, why do you want to be the guinea pigs? I don't understand. And so am I here to celebrate that COVID is over?
Barbie, I am not I'm not prepared to answer that question as
Okay.
the moderator, guys. But I do want to invite you, Barbie. What is your perspective on the question that we've been addressing about how do we move forward? Can we have accountability without retribution, and thinking about how we move forward?
Okay, I'm of the opinion that, and it doesn't just include the medical profession, it includes our government. The governors of the states that day in, I don't know if it was summer of 2020 or summer of 2021, but when they put, the nursing homes, particularly Seattle, it comes to mind. I think there was somewhere in Minnesota, but they didn't isolate the COVID patients. They kept them all. What they did is they isolated their loved ones. They could not grieve, and I had, at that time when I learned of that, I had been watching this program that about horses, where there was some kind of disease with horses, and they separated all the horses from the people, from the horses that had the disease. They didn't do that in the nursing homes. They stuck them all together and kept their loved ones away, where they couldn't, when they died, they couldn't even have a funeral. They couldn't have closure. They could have nothing, and no autopsy, no anything. I think that is highly criminal, highly criminal, and people should be held accountable for that. And retribution, absolutely. That is murder, in my opinion. Sorry, I got a little excited with that.
All right. Thank you for weighing in, Barbie. And let's see. I want to go to Jenna. Jenna, I'm going to go to you next. And referencing, I do want to mention too that as I mentioned at the beginning of this, if you would like to participate in a Braver Angels conversation that brings together, it's like what we call our red blue workshops, except it's a conversation oriented around the divide over COVID. Brings together about 7 or 8 people who are generally supportive of how public health leaders handled COVID, and 7 or 8 people who are generally not supportive or critical of how public health leaders handled it. And Lincoln Earl Centers, if you are in the house now, go ahead and put in the chat the information for how, your email address for how people can learn more about this initiative. Because I do want to encourage you, those of you who are here who would like to take the next step of more conversation on this, encourage you to do that. And I would also say that a part of the Truth and Trust initiative it's been a mix of bringing together public health leaders and ordinary citizens in conversations, sometimes bringing just public health leaders together, and sometimes, as we're doing tonight here, although people in the audience there might be some public health leaders, bringing mostly ordinary citizens together, because we think that we all have a role to play in moving forward and ensuring that the next pandemic we can do that one better than we did the last one. Yeah, so Lincoln Earl Centers has just put his email address into the chat for anyone who wants to follow up with him to learn about how you can participate or organize a workshop on this issue. Jenna, I want to go to you. Jenna, tell us where you are on the political spectrum so we can keep track there. Oh, Jenna, where'd you go?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can't see you
Okay.
for some reason, but go for it.
I'm in Chickamauga Beach, Minnesota, just for a background, and I guess you'd call me purple. I'm pro-freedom. I'm a little patriot. My parents always laughed and said, we never knew we were going to have a hippie conservative. How you can do that. But I see both sides, and I see that in a lot of things. Not that this matters, but just for a background for you guys, where my perspective comes from. I'm an RN, and I have been for over 20 years. My master's is in holistic health with a concentration in herbology. I've studied in Peru, Ecuador, Haiti, Dominican, all around the world with different cultures. I absolutely love learning from other people that are different from myself. My minor in school was history and philosophy and religion. So this makes me in a pretty unique situation, born for such a time as this, I guess. But I have not that I don't have an open mind, and I love, like I said, listening to people that views are different from mine, because I believe that we can learn from each other. And I've said that all along. We need a big, huge round table meeting, because that's what we used to do. You know, we used to come together, hear different perspectives and opinions, and then do what's best for the patient. I also lived through the riots in the Twin Cities, and we sold our house and moved way up north Minnesota. All done with all of that. Very sad to leave the cities, but it was quite the experience. I had 2 coworkers that got shot at, and neighborhoods that were considered bad my whole life growing up. I was never scared to go into as their midwife and nurse. And these people were not from Minneapolis that were ruining, not to say there wasn't ones that jumped on the bandwagon, but anyhow, I'm not going to lie. There's some things that have been said that trigger me, but I want to tell you quickly how this has personally impacted my life. Other than what I already went through. I personally almost died from COVID. It is a bioweapon in my experience and medicine, and personally, I've never experienced anything like it. My respiratory symptoms didn't start till day 10, but it was as much spiritual and mental and emotional as it was physical. And I have atheist doctor friends that even said, Jenna, because they know I was the spiritual, religious one, holistic practitioner that would come down and deal with things that the atheist doctors didn't want to deal with. And they said, Jenna, there's something to what you say. These patients don't know each other, and they're having the same exact nightmares night after night. And I had those same nightmares as well. I encourage you guys to look into history. I did a genealogy thing on my family. I had
Take
witches.
about 15 more seconds, Jenna.
Okay. Witches that were burned at stake in my family in the name of medicine, becoming homeopathy and witches. When the church found out that they could not just have power, but they could have money, homeopathy was made into a quackery. They burned the witches, and you had to be male to go into the schools to be licensed, and you had to be male.
Jenna,
And that's, yep.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there because we need to get to the next person. But thank you for weighing in and for being part of this conversation. Let's go now to Julia. I'm looking for somebody who leans blue to keep the political diversity here. Do you happen to lean blue, Julia?
I'm an independent.
Okay, let me come to you next. Let me go to Luke right now. Luke Grossmiller, you are up.
Hey, I'm curious about misinformation, and it seems like Kevin has studied that a lot in his life. And what kind of concerns, Kevin, do you have about misinformation in the COVID era from both the left and the right?
I get all the easy questions. No, this is all difficult. But oh gosh. Well, I mean, I think the way that I'm thinking about it right now is, and maybe it's always been this way to some degree, but it appears to me that there is a crisis of credibility among our institutions. I think maybe that's because of social media, sort of the multipolarity that's been caused by social media, other voices that have been not suppressed in the past, or just simply not even a part of the conversation are now part of the conversation. And so I think we are exposed to a lot more perspectives than we were in the past. I wonder if the authorities themselves are less competent than they were in the past. I'm not sure. I know certainly the way COVID was handled would lead me to that conclusion. And so what happens is you have an establishment, a set of scientific institutions that don't, during COVID, they didn't put out reliable information. In fact, you might even say that everything was either exaggerated or the opposite of the truth in many cases. And so then you have people looking to alternative sources to get their information. Unfortunately, there are no really strong incentives for these alternative sources to provide good information. They have almost as much, or maybe more, incentives in some ways to be hyperbolic, to exaggerate, to basically tell people things that they want to hear and appeal to those sort of more baser instincts of a lot of people, or ideological biases. And then so because we have a loss of trust in our institutions, and perhaps even a corruption compared to historically, we're looking to these alternative sources. And so you have a proliferation on all sides of misinformation on all sides. And I don't know if that can be, so then I guess I'm always interested in these big picture set of solutions that are, this is just a basic outline, but we need some way to reestablish institutions that are credible and that people will listen to. And one of the problems with this also, though, is that one really great institution, and I guess I just bring up problems. One really great institution is the Cochrane collaboration, and they do a lot of evidence syntheses for the medical community. But whenever they did evidence syntheses on masks in particular, they looked at all the most rigorous randomized controlled trials, and they came to the conclusion that, you know, there's a small to negligible benefit from masking, even though in the
15
past,
more seconds, Kevin.
Even though in the past everybody would look up to them, because you have, I think, politicization of the public health establishment. They actually significantly tried to destroy the credibility of the Cochrane collaboration. So then you get to the question of, if you have somebody with credibility, you also need them to have political power. It's a real big mess, and I don't even.
Okay.
So that's all.
All right. Thank you for the question, Luke, and thank you for the comment, Kevin. Let's go to Julia, and then I want to go to Lou Walensky, who says center right. So Julia.
Yes, so I just wanted to say that so I you know, am a massage therapist, but basically we had a medical therapy group that met throughout COVID, and I was very impressed that we managed to meet bi-weekly, you know, throughout this time without canceling our group. And we had very diverse opinions about vaccination and the policies that were being unrolled throughout that time. And it was not easy to meet. One of the, you know, the basis of the group is, you know, studying medical therapies, alternative medical therapies, but there is a strong interest in ethics and how do we include the whole human being. So we had traditional MDs, but also people that were, you know, interested in alternative therapies. So I just wanted to say that it was very difficult to get through that phase, but we did it. And when people were ill, they weren't attending, but we continued to meet. I'm very proud of that. I was actually hosted it in my home. But I wanted to mention, follow through on this medical ethics theme, because I believe that that is where the solution lies, and that there actually needs to be some kind of independent ethics committee for the NIH, because you cannot have a body that has so much power and within it and conflict of interest in how they roll out policies. So you just have to, it doesn't seem that difficult to basically come up with a system by which you have a medical ethics committee for the NIH. You have a medical ethics committee for the WHO. These bodies have to be robust, and they have to be filled with people with diverse opinions. And we just don't have that. We don't have it within the WHO either, potentially, you know, really. But anyway, that's my own view, that the diversity of opinion is critical to objective research.
Okay, terrific. Thank you, Julia. I want to go to Lou Walensky. Lou, you're up.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I want to say, yes, Julia, I agree about the ethics committee. And Jerry, immune systems, it was very upsetting during COVID that hardly anything was mentioned about what you can do to build up your immune system. So I'm a big believer in dialogue, and yet I'm also concerned about dialogue as justifying something that is an obvious wrong. So clearly, as other people have referred to, there certainly were a lot of things that were wrong during this time. But the thing that I want to focus on is something that Tracy mentioned, that the Collins and Fauci went around the regulations. They went around the law banning gain-of-function research. So that seems to, aside from all the other things that are wrong, that seems to be something that was obviously illegal, obviously was wrong. And I don't know how you get around that with dialogue. I mean, there are other things that I think were very problematic, like, for instance, banning, like, really some of the top virologists in the country. That was very bad, but it wasn't illegal. But this thing about, going around those regulations for Wilk, for Travis, for Kevin, how do you see there not being some sort of consequence if that is in fact what took place, that they went around the law and did something illegal?
Lou, if it's okay, let's leave it there as a question and let Wilk or Travis or Kevin respond in 1 minute.
Sure.
Go ahead, Wilk.
Yeah. I would just say, kind of along the lines of much of what Travis has said tonight, and something that's been said in plenty of the conversations that I've had about this. Not all consequences are legal consequences. There's some things bigger than the idea of putting somebody in prison or whatever. I mean, these are people who have dedicated their whole entire lives to the public good, if you want to say that. I mean, so the reality is what is the ultimate, what is going to be the ultimate way to get the most information out there? What's going to be the best way to get the I don't care if you want to call it the greatest number of confessions or whatever, but the reality is if we don't put anything else on the table other than you're going to prison, we're going to just start handing out prison sentences, where does it all stop? We talked about, I think Kyle had mentioned, there were local courts that didn't have the will to uphold people's First Amendment rights or their ability to see family members, things like that. I mean, where does it stop? Where do we just put half the population in prison? So the reality is this: if we are going to
leave it with this comment, then.
Yeah, if we're going to get to the root cause of what happened with this thing, we need to go by a blueprint that is probably not going to be a government solution. It's going to be a we the people solution, because the government is way too polarized. They're way too vested in their polarization. It's going to have to be done by a blueprint of everyday Americans that demand a commission of some sort. And in order to make that commission work, we got to have the right people at the table, and passing out prison sentences isn't going to get us there.
All right. I'm going to call on a couple more people, but I want to ask Lincoln Earl Centers, who is a part of the Truth and Trust Project as well, to say a little bit more about what he's been doing for the workshops and how people can get involved, and also about Braver Angels. Lincoln, over to you.
Yeah,
Lincoln.
thank you, David. Well, I've been really enjoying hearing everybody's voices, and really appreciate the feelings and the vulnerability that all the speakers are bringing to this, the panelists and the participants. So really grateful to hear everybody's perspectives. Just real quickly, just to reiterate what David said about these workshops, we're basing it on sort of the flagship workshop for Braver Angels, which brought Reds and Blues together, and we're using that structure to get away from the partisan identification and just bring people together across this divide, across the divide of how people felt about the COVID response. And what we're trying to do is to build a venue where people can come together and relate to each other and practice expressing their personal experience. So recognizing that there's a lot of ways to unfold this divide, but just to start with relating, building trust so that we can seek truth together in trust. And so that's the design of this workshop. Again, my email's in the chat. So if you're interested in bringing this to your area in the country, please reach out and I can share more about that. And I just want to share, I really like that at the beginning, it was brought up that, you know, when we have these criminal indictments against Trump, or when we have these congressional hearings with public leaders, there can be this feeling of waiting, that we as citizens are sort of helpless or complacent, waiting for answers from others. And then we feel validated when we get the answers that we agree with, and we feel like we need to double down and defend ourselves when the answers we don't agree with come up. So this is just a unique opportunity to come together outside of that space, which is out there so strongly in the media and the culture, and just relate to each other. So that's what we're trying to do with the workshops. And anybody that's interested, please do reach out. Thanks again to everybody for participating tonight. And if you're new to Braver Angels, if this is your first event or you're just checking us out, the braverangels.org, we have a real simple, straightforward website. Check out our schedule, check out how you can come and check out what we're doing, and see if you want to be more involved. And you can consider becoming a member. It's a small fee for the year. And by becoming a member, you support this grassroots work that we're doing with Braver Angels, and all sorts of ways to volunteer, participate, practice engagement across differences. So I encourage you to check out the website after this. Thanks, David.
All right, thank you, Lincoln. All right, let's hear from 3 more people. I'm going to go to Susan Broy. Susan Broy, I believe you lean blue. Go for it.
Thank you. I am leaning Democratic. And I do have the first answer to the question is I definitely think we need accountability. There's no question about that. But that does not mean we need retribution. I think the concept of what was mentioned before about the Columbia disaster is a nice example. We needed to investigate that, but we don't need to blame people or put them in jail, anything like that. We just need to find out. And I think it's particularly important in this situation with the pandemic, because we're going to have more pandemics like this. It's coming. We have to figure out how we can handle it. So we need to investigate this thoroughly. And I think one thing that's missing in all this is going back to the very beginning and realizing where we were. We were in a situation, if you looked at New York, where there were body bags piling up. They didn't have enough refrigerator trucks to put dead people in. Everybody was scrambling to figure out what we could do to solve this. So yes, were mistakes made? There's no question mistakes were made. But this was because we're dealing with limited information. If you remember in the very beginning of this pandemic, we were all afraid that we would contaminate people with touching things. And I remember at that time bringing in groceries and washing them all off because we thought we were contaminated. Well, that was wrong. But we didn't know that. And that's how research in medicine works. I am a physician. I've worked in medical research, and it takes time to figure out what the right thing is. We didn't know whether masks were important. We needed to take time to figure that out. But I think the bottom line with this is we have to give the people that were involved, and I have great respect for Dr. Fauci. I know him personally. He's a wonderful physician and a wonderful researcher, and he did the best he could with the limited information. But now we have to move forward. We have to look at what the evidence is. We have to look for accountability. but not retribution.
All right, thank you very much, Susan. I want to go to Joyce, who leans red. Joyce, over to you. Do you have a comment or a question? And go ahead and unmute yourself, Joyce.
There I am.
There you go.
I wanted to share just a little bit of my experience with COVID, and then perhaps pose something to Kevin in light of his pursuit of the medical field. I found out about early treatment for COVID in spring of 2020, when everybody was being told to stay home until you had to go to the hospital. And a local doctor was able to give me that protocol for myself and whoever in my family was willing to believe it. Got us through. It was Dr. Peter McCullough's that was founded throughout the international team that came to an understanding of the pathophysiology of this disease. And so the science was there. It mapped it from early symptoms all the way over to hospitalization and possible death. The AAPSonline.org, Association of Physicians and Surgeons, had it front page on their website, but they too were censored. It did involve ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, nutraceuticals. It was a very regimented approach. I was grateful for that. And the local doctor said 100 to 200 of his patients did very well on this protocol. The 2 that did die did not get the early treatment. That was the Delta. So I was very grounded in the way I was looking at what the government was doing. I couldn't believe them anymore. And so my son came to me after he got his Moderna and said, "Mom, you ready?" I said, I can't trust him. And I can't compromise your dad who has heart issues. So, and my sister worked in an inner city hospital with an autoimmune disease, and she finally was able to get a waiver, but it was very difficult. Atul Gawande wrote the book, Being Mortal, as an MD, if you've never heard of the book. But his point in the book was that the medical profession, everybody as patients are like, what else can you throw my way? What else can you do for me? And there's this anxiousness about certainly medical has the answers for everything. And the book was written on the compassionate basis of Atul's life experience with death and how his own family processed that through a understanding of quality of life and personal decisions. And Kevin, I'm thinking about your perception, and you're getting kicked out of medical school. And I'm hoping for a renewed honoring of the patient and doctor relationship, and not a federal control mechanism that engages money interests. I think that is
so. Take about 10 more seconds.
I just think that is so important, and it needs to be talked about, and early treatment needs to be talked about. That was effective.
All right. Thank you for sharing your experience, Joyce, and for being part of the conversation. Brian Sperling, I want to call on you. Brian, do you have a comment or a question?
Oh boy, comments. So I just want to say so many. I'm going to be very fast because I wrote down so many notes from all the original speakers. But where I was when COVID hit, I was a school counselor in an urban school district. In the urban school district, it was very believed that COVID was very real and was very deadly. In the suburbs and where I lived, not so much. And I had friends that said it's a fake disease, no, nothing happens, when I just spent that whole day talking to a handful of children whose best friend died. whose parents had died. And that divide, you know, started really percolating in my head at that point. Before I was a counselor in an urban school district, I worked for a dietary supplement company. I, in fact, was the COO of a dietary supplement company, closed down by the FDA, under the direction of a man, no names, who now profits off of dietary supplements and closed down many dietary supplement companies while he was the head of dietary supplements for the FDA. Just saying. Additionally, I think, you know, we talk about medicine, we talk about big pharma. We can't ignore insurance companies, health insurance. The United States, we have a business model for healthcare, profit model for healthcare. And I think that that plays heavily into a lot of the response. In my work now, I see a lot of echo chambers. And I just tensed up when Travis first said the word echo chamber, because I hate them. I hate them. I hate the fact that my friends, my family, everyone I know has somehow drifted into an echo chamber, and they call them deep political conversations, when it's just an echo chamber, when they're only hearing their own side and refuse to hear any others. And if not refuse, attack the other sides. And that brings me to what I believe, and that is a problem-solving approach. And it's been mentioned over and over again here. We have to stop polarizing our thinking. We have to stop looking for people to blame. If we keep looking for people to blame, we'll never solve the problem. It's already happened. The problem's already gone, and there may be another one on the horizon. And if we're still looking for people to blame when that problem comes, we've wasted an opportunity to strengthen our infrastructure in order to prevent a disaster from coming. And I think that with these echo chambers, we get defensive now. If we're not in the right echo chamber with each other—
Take about 10 more seconds, Brian.
No problem. If we're not in the right echo chamber with each other, we get attacked. We're blaming each other. And that's not the intent. It shouldn't be the intent. The intent should be to work together to solve the problem.
All right. And with that, I want to thank everyone for participating in this conversation. All of the people who spoke up in the audience, our first speakers. To end, I'm going to invite our first speakers to talk about, just, in 30 seconds, what they're taking away with them from this conversation. We are going to post in the chat the link to the feedback form. If you could copy and paste that feedback form, and then after we close out here, just take 3 minutes and share with us your feedback on on tonight. And as we say, we hope that if this is your first Braver Angels conversation, there's another one on Thursday night. There's a Braver Angels debate, as we call it, which is a little bit different format than here. A Braver Angels debate on immigration. And we hope that you join us for that. Or we hope that you look up a local alliance that's working in your area, local group of Reds, Blues, and people who don't lean either way. Again, build relationships and trust, find common ground, and better understand our differences. We're going to have differences, but can we disagree better is the question. So take that feedback form. We'd love for you to join future conversations. I'm going to start with Kevin. Kevin, what are you taking away with you from our conversation tonight in just 30 seconds to a minute? And go ahead and unmute yourself.
A greater clarity of the sort of structure of the questions. I don't know if that makes sense, but sort of where the problems that need to be solved, the approaches that need to be taken, and it's very vague, but in 30 or 60 seconds is probably the best I can do. So
Thank you. Travis, then Tracy. Travis, what are you taking away with you from the conversation?
I'm taking away, I guess, a sense of optimism. I think that a lot of the things that we've heard today, even the people that disagree with my perspective and really want legal accountability, I think that there is, or retribution. I think that there's, there's a humanity and, a reachable humanity in that perspective. I think that it comes from a good place. I think we're all seeking the same thing, and I'm just optimistic that I think we're, as with every Braver Angels conversation, a lot closer than I originally thought before I started the conversation.
Tracy, what are you taking away with you from this conversation?
I'm taking away that the greatest common ground that we have is that we really want the truth. We really want people to tell the truth and to create the environment. And I do appreciate creating the right environment where it's safe to tell the truth. So I do appreciate that. And I also want the truth. And I think in order to have that, as many people have mentioned, we need to just disappear the censorship industrial complex. And we need to face, like, where is this coming from? Is there a totalitarian power grab going on at a global level? I mean, this is typical of authoritarian power grabs. Create an emergency, create a panic, and then bring in the solution that you have in mind. So I think that people are trying to be charitable to people, but I think that we should not be naive to think that that there are nefarious, powerful forces at hand, and we need to uncover that as well.
Thank you, Tracy. Wilk.
So I like the word optimism Travis used. There are a lot of people out there right now that are willing to speak up that couldn't speak up for a very long time. That censorious industrial complex, Tracy talks about, it's very real, and a lot of people were not able to speak up for a very long time. And I the Braver Angels way of speaking up freely, fully, and without fear is alive and well in groups like this, and I think it's very, very important that we continue to do that. We continue to build on that. But I also encourage everybody to understand we have to play this for the long game. If we want to get the right results, it's got to be done the right way. And that blueprint is going to include bringing to the table people that we really, really may not like, to put it mildly. But there are blueprints for asking the right questions, getting to the right answers, and the time for finger pointing and consequences will come. But there's a few steps that need to be taken before that. So I think this has been excellent. It's been incredible. And I'm going to throw a plug in there for my buddy Jay Bhattacharya. If anybody wants to check out the norfolkgroup.org, that is a blueprint for some incredible questions that need answers. And norfolkgroup.org. All right.
All right. And for me, I'm taking away, I'll use the word hope. And I say the word hope, not because we, necessarily have, common ground all over the place, or, but because I think that we were able to show that we can have a conversation about a really difficult issue and do it in a way where we're really listening to each other, taking each other seriously. And it's we the people doing the work of we the people. And so I'm taking away hope from this, and really grateful to everyone who said anything at this conversation, and for everyone who came and participated. I'm grateful. All right, well, let's go out there and let's build a house united. Let's do the work of we the people. Take care, everyone. Good night.